Hi, I'm Chris Sangster, and welcome back to the studio. And welcome back to Logic Pro Explored, my series where I'm doing a deep dive on each of the sections and windows inside of Logic Pro. Today, we'll be continuing our examination of the control bar. In the first 3 episodes of this series, we looked at the views, transport, and display sections of the control bar. Click right up here on the card to check out the full playlist if you need to get caught up. In the Customize Control Bar and Display menu, we can see that the control bar has one final section called Modes and Functions, and it contains a lot of important and useful features. Diving in, our first option here is called Sync, and enabling it will give us this clock with an arrow icon. Now, to be perfectly honest, this is not a feature I've ever really used, but this button gives us the ability to turn on external synchronization, which allows us to select a different source other than Logic Pro as the clock source. You can only have one device transmitting the signal that synchronizes all of the connected digital audio devices on your system. This signal is referred to as a word clock. And most of the time, we want Logic Pro to be that transmitting device, where the settings of your project like BPM and sample rate are communicated from Logic to something like an external drum machine or even your audio interface. However, there are certain setups where it may be advantageous to choose a different device as the word clock transmitter, and this button gives us the ability to do that. If we click and hold on it, we see the different options we have for external synchronization protocols. Ableton Link is a protocol that allows multiple devices to sync with each other over a local network. It was designed for group collaboration, allowing multiple people, each with their own device, to have beat, tempo, and phase synced between them automatically. Next, SMPTE Sync, MTC. It's probably the most common option for external syncing, as it allows Logic to receive a MIDI time code from, say, a synthesizer, and use that as the clock source. It will also accept a SMPTE signal and convert that to a MIDI time code to use as the word clock. Finally, there's manual sync mode, which allows you to manually sync Logic to an external device that doesn't transmit timecode information with one of those previous protocols. And you do this by using the tempo interpreter window. There are a few other available settings here, such as auto sync in, which allows Logic to respond automatically to the first synchronization signal that it receives, and MIDI machine control, which is a set of commands used to control the transport functions of any MMC capable tape machine, meaning you could use the play, pause, and record buttons in Logic Pro and have your tape machine respond to those actions. And finally, at the bottom here, we have access to some associated synchronization menus of Logic Pro. As I mentioned, I don't ever use these functions as my studio setup doesn't call for it, but it's great to know that these external synchronization options are available for those that need them, or if I ever decide to expand the hardware side of my studio. A tape machine would be pretty nice, actually. Moving on, we have the replace function, which gives us the ability to change what happens when we record over top of an existing region. For audio regions, when replace is turned on, recording over top of an existing region does not create a comp folder. Instead, it just replaces what is already there with the new recording. This is helpful when you know you want to change a part or fix a mistake in a recording without having to worry about messing with the comp. This is all the replace function does for audio recordings. However, when using the replace function with MIDI regions, we have a few different options. By default, when we record over an existing MIDI region, the new recording is simply added into the previous recording. But with replace mode, this changes. Click and hold on the replace button in the control bar to see the different options. There are 4 options, but really there are only 2 functions, erase and punch, and then an option for doing them by creating a new region, that's region mode, or doing them within the existing region, and that's content mode. Let's look at this MIDI recording as an example. Without replace mode on, this melody I played is just added to the existing chords. With region erase, the chords are deleted and the melody is put in their place in a new region. With content erase, the chords are still replaced with the melody, but no new region is created. It all happens within the region that's already there. In either of the erase modes, everything that exists on the MIDI track from the beginning of the recording to the end of the recording will be erased, whether or not we actually play a note during the recording. In punch mode, however, only the existing MIDI underneath when we actually play something on our MIDI keyboard during recording will be replaced. In region punch mode, we can see these first two chords stayed and only the third chord, when I actually played the melody, has been replaced with a new region. Same thing in content punch mode, just it doesn't create a new region, it all happens within the existing region. I find content punch mode the most useful of these four by far, as it allows me to hit record and then punch in my fix to my MIDI part without having to define a specific range for the punch in beforehand. And speaking of defining specific ranges for punch ins, next up we have auto punch, which allows us to define a set recording or punch in range. With this up and down arrow icon on and turned red, we get this extra bar in the ruler right below the cycle range. And in this bar, we can click and drag to create our auto punch range. Alternatively, if we enable the next function, set punch in and out locator by playhead, we can navigate our playhead to where we want the auto punch range to start and stop and use these buttons to set the in and out points. What this does is gives us the ability to set a precise range of time for a recording to take place. We can say click and drag across these two bars, then hit record from the beginning of the session, and only those two bars will actually be recorded. The rest of the time, the session will just be playing back. It can be helpful if you're recording yourself and want to punch in a fix at a very specific spot. We can even use a marquee selection to set the auto punch range. If we click and hold on the auto punch button, we can enable marquee selection engages auto punch recording. Now, if we have a marquee selection and hit record with auto punch on, Logic automatically sets the auto punch range to match the marquee selection. There's also the option called marquee line engages auto punch recording, which means we can just click with the marquee tool to create a marquee line instead of a selection, and then hit record, and the auto punch range will start at that line and then continue until the end of the session. However, do note that with auto punch recording, the pre-roll will not be recorded if you don't have the count in function on. So if I just hit record and let auto punch start and stop the recording with the count in off, I can't drag back the beginning of this take. And I personally think this is a huge flaw, as I always like to have a little wiggle room at the punch in point to make a clean edit. For this reason, I always use auto punch in conjunction with the count in feature. Because with count in on, Logic does record during that pre-roll, and so I can drag back on this take to create a cleaner edit. Before we continue on with the video, I want to show you how to get the most out of Logic Pro. Listen, I love Logic, but the truth is that right out of the box, or should I say right out of the App Store, it is not fully optimized for musicians, producers, and audio engineers. There are just some truly strange default settings in Logic Pro. That's why I created the Logic Pro Optimization Guide, a free to download video guide and accompanying PDF cheat sheet that walks you through step by step all of the settings to change in order to get the most out of Logic Pro. These setting changes will benefit first-time Logic Pro users and wily Logic Pro vets alike. I truly believe that by changing these settings, you will not only improve your workflow, but actually speed up your music making process. So, if you want to take control of the DAW and optimize Logic Pro, click the link in the description box below the like button and download the Logic Pro Optimization Guide. It's all yours, completely free. The next two controls, software monitoring and auto input monitoring, are closely related, but they tend to cause a bit of confusion, especially when you throw the input monitoring button on the track headers into the equation. But don't worry, here's a simple breakdown of what each of those functions do. I'll plug in and record my guitar as an example. Software monitoring. It's this button, it looks like a little speaker and it turns green when it's enabled. This allows us to hear the guitar signal coming through Logic Pro, including any plugins that are on the track. When we turn software monitoring off, we can no longer hear the guitar signal as I play, either before or during recording. Turning this off is helpful if you are monitoring your input source from somewhere other than Logic Pro, like through the UAD console app for an example. The next function is auto input monitoring. It's this icon that turns purple when activated. And this allows us to hear the guitar signal while recording, but before and after recording, we hear only what was previously recorded. If auto input monitoring is off, we can hear what I'm playing as well as what was previously recorded before the recording starts. Auto input monitoring is very helpful when doing punch-ins, but it only functions if software monitoring is on. If software monitoring is off, you still can't hear what you're playing at all. So what about the little orange I button on the track header, the input monitoring switch? How the heck does that come into play? Well, here's a little known secret. Input monitoring isn't doing anything if the track is record enabled. A record enabled track will always allow you to hear the input signal as long as software monitoring is enabled. That little I button doesn't change a thing. What input monitoring does is allow you to hear the input signal on a track that is not record enabled. And its superpower is how it combines with auto input monitoring. With a track input monitored and not record enabled, and with auto input monitoring on, you will only hear the input signal, not what has been previously recorded on playback, allowing you to practice without having to listen to your previous take. With a track input monitored, not record enabled, and auto input monitoring off, you will hear both the input signal and the previously recorded signal, allowing you to play along with your previous take. Okay, hopefully that all made sense. I must admit it is a fairly confusing setup, but it does allow you to define exactly when you want to hear the input signal, me playing the guitar in this case, and the previously recorded signal on the track. So it's super handy to understand how to use and combine all three of these settings. Moving on, we can activate the view of a button in the control bar to switch to Prefader Metering. If we open the mixer and activate Prefader Metering, we see that the fader and the meters switch sides on each channel strip. What this means is that now the signal shown in the meters is not affected by the volume fader. You can see as I pull this fader down to off, the meter is still lighting up. This allows us to monitor the level of the input signal irrespective of the fader, so we can make sure that we are recording at a proper level. Prefader metering is most useful while recording, so we can monitor the true input signal, but still use the faders to set a good balance in our headphones. The default mode, post-fader metering, in which the meters do respond to the changes in the volume fader, is most helpful for mixing, so we can monitor the level of our tracks as they are sounding in our mix. Do note though, with Prefader metering, the meter is still affected by any plugins you have on the track. So to monitor the true unaffected input signal, you must turn all of the plugins on that track off. Next up, a super helpful feature, low latency monitoring mode. I'm sure we've all had to deal with the rage-inducing effects of latency while recording. In Logic Pro, latency is usually caused by plugins in the recording signal chain that require a small amount of input delay to function properly. Stacking too many of these plugins up in a recording signal chain can cause that annoying delay when you go to record. Luckily, Logic has a great solution for that in low latency monitoring mode. When it is enabled and the icon is turned orange, Logic automatically bypasses any latency inducing plugins in the recording signal chain. You can see when I record enable this track, the plugins that would cause latency are turned off and their text is orange. It also automatically bypasses any bus sends on the track. This does, of course, change the sound you hear as you are recording, but it ensures that sound is in time in your headphones. One little hidden feature of low latency monitoring mode is that you can define a threshold of how much delay a plugin can cause before it gets turned off when this mode is activated. Go to the Logic Pro menu, Audio, and then the General tab. And right down here at the bottom, when low latency monitoring mode is on, we can use this slider to set the acceptable delay limit. The next three settings all control setting the length of the cycle range by actions other than clicking and dragging in the ruler. Honestly, I feel like these should have just been transport controls, but they just ran out of space over here and stuck them in modes and functions instead. And honestly, to me, they're pretty useless, but for the sake of being thorough, here's what they do. Set left-right locator by playhead allows you to set the beginning or end of the cycle range to where the playhead currently is located. Use the L and down arrow icon to set the beginning of the cycle range and the R and down arrow icon to set the end. Set left-right locator numerically brings up this window where you can type in the beginning or end of the cycle range. And again, we have an L and an R button that correspond to the cycle beginning and end respectively. And then move locators by cycle length allows you to jump the entire cycle either forwards or backwards by the length of the current cycle. So if we have the cycle set from bar 3 to 4 and then hit this left arrow icon, the cycle will jump back and be from bar 2 to 3. We then have the tuner, which is very handy, especially for guitarists, but it will respond to any incoming audio signal so we can tune any instrument coming through Logic. And we don't even have to have software monitoring on for it to work. We also don't need to put the tuner plugin on the track. We just click on the tuning fork icon in the control bar and the tuner automatically works with the selected track when it is record enabled or input monitored. We can even have multiple instances of the tuner up if we need to tune multiple instruments at once. Just select the second instrument's track header and hit the tuning fork icon again and a second tuner will appear. The audio input that the tuner is listening to will be listed at the top of the tuner window. We can also define the tuning reference for just the tuner right here. So this won't change anything about the playback or tuning of the project, but just allows you to tune an instrument that perhaps has a different tuning standard than A440. Next, we have a feature simply called solo, but it does a very specific type of soloing. Hitting this solo button in the control bar will solo only the selected region. The rest of the regions in the project, even those on that same track, will be muted. Kind of an odd one. I've never really found a good use for it, but if you use it all the time, drop it in the comments below. Let me know how. I'm actually going to skip over the count in and metronome click functions for this video. They are such powerful and important tools to understand how to use properly in Logic Pro that I think they deserve their own dedicated video in this series. So the final function to discuss is the master volume slider, which in Logic Pro 11.2 got a little update. Now we have this drop-down menu where we can change the view to just that of the output meter, instead of the traditional meter plus fader look. As I've said before, I think this is a great new addition because I recommend always leaving your master volume fader at unity gain. That way you are forced to set the balance of your tracks properly to be able to hear everything well, but also not cause clipping. And I found in the past it was all too easy to accidentally change the output gain slider with it displayed like this in the control bar. There we go, all of the modes and functions of the Logic Pro control bar explained. On the next episode of the series, we will conclude our discussion of the control bar by deep diving into the metronome and count-in functions. Until then, if you have any questions at all, please leave them in the comments below. I would be happy to answer them. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you at the studio next time. Thanks.